All right, let's do a quick review of what we're going to need to do to get on our website to build an instrument panel with gauges. So some of you may have already seen our Maps app, which is at www.jettiluadfm.app. And if we go into the gauges page of the app, it should come up with a panel that looks something like this. Now, if you have a smaller window on your browser, you may see that things get squished a little bit left to right, and if it gets squished too much, then you may have to scroll back and forth to see all the panels. There's a panel on the left for selecting some of the example panels and saving things. There's a panel on the right which has an edit box for each of the widgets. Let's just refer to the individual elements on the screen, whether they're bar graphs or round gauges or arc gauges or little lights or text boxes as widgets. And so it'll come up with the turbine dashboard, which is meant here to be an example. You can see over here on the left side of the panel, there are some examples of a 4-up panel with 4 gauges, 2 large gauges of the maximum size, something that shows you what you might do with a pre-flight panel to look at, battery status and current draw during pre-flight. Let's go back to our turbine panel. And what you'll see is each of the gauges here has a corresponding, or each of the widgets here has a corresponding area over on the right. So let's take a look at the RPM gauge. And you can see that I can move the RPM gauge around with drag and drop. I can also move it back and forth with sliders. And if I click on the sliders, I can use my arrow key to do more precise positioning. If I want to, I can turn on an alignment grid that divides the screen up into numbers of divisions for easy visual alignment. And then if I open up, or excuse me, before we do that, I can have a little value slider that will animate the gauge, and it'll show you the needle moving it. It'll show you a digital representation of the value. And then if I open up the edit window, you'll see I can edit things like the minimum and maximum of the gauge, the radius of the gauge, the various font sizes. And right now, the font sizes you'll probably recognize if you've worked with the Jetty transmitter, or so, especially with Lua, the font names that the transmitter can render. Okay, and then we can vary the starting positions of the arc. We've gone with a kind of a 270-degree arc length default, and we have a way to do various colors. We'll get to that in a second. Okay. Let's take a look at the EGT gauge on the right, and we open the editor and we slide it down a little bit. You can see that in this case, we start out with a spectrum of colors. And so the way we work this is you give it a list of colors, and the colors are the standard color names that are usable on a web page. And you can type in the color names, you can add them and subtract them, and it will create a color spectrum going from blue, in this case, through yellow and green to red. There's also a way, if you click on manual here, that I can manually adjust the exact cut points of the different gauges for where they change colors, and I can vary those by moving these sliders back and forth in the increments of those minor ticks. You can see up above here that I can vary the number of major divisions that I have, and then the number of minor divisions inside the major divisions. So that's basically what I can do with the round gauges. You'll see down here we have what we call a raw text, just a very simple text label that I can put whatever text I want to in there, turbine test. And that's something that I also can edit and move around a bit on the transmitter. So just for putting labels on things. If I don't want to have tick labels, I can set the major and subdivisions to 0, like the battery and the pump gauges, if I don't think I'm going to have room for numbers. And so you can play with this. It's pretty self-explanatory. Once I've edited these panels, I can save them with a new name. I've built up a list of things here called my panels. And then when I'm ready, I can create an app source. You notice here that there's the ability to add a background image. This is something you can also do on the transmitter. If you have favorite background images, I've gotten together a couple of different ones just for playing with myself. We can apply a background image to the panel. It's actually probably easier to do that on the transmitter, and the app will come with a couple of ones that we've taken care to make sure that are correct from a copyright point of view. So we'll just clear that out. But when I'm ready to download this to the transmitter, I click on Create App Source, and it will go to our server, and it will build a custom kind of a Jetty App Store, if you like, for you, and it will give you this dynamic repository name, which is this string here, and you'll see that this string has a number in it, a unique key that it will generate for you. It'll save it within the local storage of your browser, and you can then paste that into Jetty Studio. If you go to Jetty Studio and you do File, Configuration, App Sources, you'll see that Jetty's own App Store is fixed in there, but you can paste in this string here, paste that into the app sources, and then when you bring up Jetty Studio, you plug in your transmitter, you open the transmitter wizard, and you go to the Lua App Manager, you'll see this app in the list with our logo. And when you download that app, because you're sending it your unique key here, it will bring down for you all of the panels that you created. There's also an ability, which I don't think is useful for most pilots, but it's something I use for debugging, to download the individual files to a local disk. Now, it will keep all of this in the local storage of your browser, so if you always come back to the same browser and you don't clear out your browser memory, it will remember all the panels you worked on. If you want to make a positive backup in a file, you can click on this Download EDN Backup, and it will create a backup file, which you can then later restore if you wish to. So think of that as kind of your lifeline backup in case anything should change. And note here that restoring does replace all your panels. Okay, so that's basically this piece of it. And I give credit here to my son Russell, who's a professional programmer, who did all of this for us. He did also the website for the Maps app. And as far as we know, Russell's dynamic repositories are the only ones that we've seen people do that package up a unique set of content, whether that's maps or instrument panels, with an app, and then download it normally through Jetty Studio.